Keep going. Page 435, whatever page it is. So what are some additional risks or problems with extracting oil? There's a lot of environmental impact with oil sands. That's related to transporting them and shipping them. And it's related to the sludge that's produced afterward, and what do you do with that? It's got to be stored somewhere. And part of the problem is a lot of places that are storing their waste and what's produced as byproduct don't have the facilities to keep storing waste. So they put more in their waste storage than they're supposed to, and then there's a risk of that buckling or breaking and leaking, and that can definitely be a problem for the areas close to that. So in addition to risks of continuing to mine oil, there are some costs too. One of them is unstable oil prices. So this can be reflected in gas at the pump. Sometimes it's expensive, sometimes it's not, and it doesn't always follow like in summer it's expensive and in the winter it's cheap, or vice versa. A lot of it's based on geopolitical things. So what countries have wars, and is there oil being mined there, and how does that affect the price of oil? There's a large formation of oil in North Dakota, and that was something that, kind of like the gold rush, created a big boom for the economy. There were lots of jobs, and the state was doing really well. And then in the last couple of decades, that shut down. So people who moved out there specifically because of that either don't have a job or have had to go somewhere else to find a job. So oil is just an unstable business. Shipping the oil can be done. So a big project that you may have heard of is the Keystone Pipeline. This was supposed to ship oil from Canada down to a couple of refineries in the U.S., but there were a lot of potential problems and concerns with that, so those all got stopped. So there is still a pipeline. The problem is the people building the pipeline can't get anybody to agree to let them actually use it. So it's there, it's just not quite finished, and it really hasn't been used at this point because of the dangers that involved with that. In general, you need to know what cracking and distilling are. These are just terms for how oil refineries get their oil. Thanks, Ethan. And how they refine it. So crude oil is considered to be cracked. So cracking is heating the oil, and that breaks it down into smaller components. It helps it separate out. So rather than them being very long chains of hydrocarbons, there you go, there's a chemistry term, it is smaller molecules. And then once it's heated, if it's heated hot enough, it should go from being a liquid to a gas. So then it's distilled in order to separate it into different elements. So have you done a distillation lab before? Curious. My guess is probably not. That's something I didn't do till college. But essentially you take a mixture of 2 or 3 or maybe 4 different chemicals, and you heat it up using a Bunsen burner. You capture everything with a tube at the top, kind of like this looks. And then as the gas follows through a pipe, you have different tubes coming off, because as the gas travels, it cools off. So at different temperatures and at different separations, it should cool off and form different things. So cracking has to happen, the heating of it has to happen, and then the distilling happens in order to separate oil. Okay. All right, so you should be able to answer things like, how have our views about the size of our oil resources changed? We thought we were running out, now we think we have far more than we used to. What country is considered to have the world's largest oil reserves? That would be Venezuela. Followed next by, as a whole region, the Middle East. But what country would be next? You should know the second country as well. And then what are tar sands, and what problems are associated with mining, processing, and shipping? So there are tar sands in Canada, there are tar sands in other places around the world as well. Natural gas. How many of you use natural gas to heat your homes? Do you know what to use to heat your homes?
What are the options?
Electricity and probably natural gas. Or you could use firewood. Some people have their home built so that they use a wood stove. there you go. So you can go home and ask. Okay.
Microelectricity.
Yeah, that's pretty common.
Is that the better one? What's better?
That's a good question. We'll talk about that actually. So for natural gas, again, it's organic, but it's small compounds. And I have the word volatile written up here. So do you know what volatile means? Usually it implies that it's flammable. If it's volatile, it means that it should be able to light pretty easily. So they're small volatile organic compounds like methane. Methane is just CH4, so it's pretty much the smallest carbon compound that you can get. Carbon and 4 hydrogen. So what are the pros of using natural gas and what are the cons? One example of a good thing is that it is cleaner to burn. That's because it's smaller carbon molecules, so it's not as dirty. But one con is fracking. We'll talk more about fracking in a minute. But fracking is one way that it is mined, and that has some side effects and some downfalls. Another example of some stuff that you should know, and you've got to know this kind of for everyone, so it's a lot of countries to look at or just regions to know. But for natural gas, the Middle East has the biggest reserves, and then followed by Russia. You'd want to know probably just those first two. So if you haven't gathered, there's a lot of resources in the Middle East. What we've talked about so far. Okay, look in here. Okay, so fracking, and what is it? Does anybody know? Okay, fracking is a way to get and harvest out natural gas that's not available just by pumping. So in order to frack an area and mine the natural gas, the miners pump water and sand and other chemicals into the rock at a really high pressure. That causes the gas to come out of the rock so that they're able to harvest it. The problem with that, though, is that it can cause water pollution. It can also cause, because of the water pollution, it affects the people and the habitats in the area. Okay. Additionally, because fracking is something that we've been using for a while, that's helped lower the price of natural gas because it makes natural gas easier to get. But a problem with that is then if we can get cheap natural gas, we're not putting money into developing renewable resources. So it kind of all comes back to the bottom line and the dollar and who's going to make money versus who has to spend money. And if you can get something cheap, why would you spend money to try to develop new technology? Yeah, it kind of comes back to that pretty much every time when people debate looking at renewable versus non-renewable resources. Okay. So there is information about fracking and why people are debating it. This would potentially be helpful for you to look at and just jot some notes down. This has some pros and cons in it as well, as far as why fracking is good or why it is not good. There's a lot of information on this next couple pages about shipping gas. One of the reasons that's something that people debate about is the fact that gas is usually produced or collected in places where coal and oil are mined. However, it gets burned off a lot of the time. So we're burning something that's a perfectly good resource that could be used for energy, and we're just not using it. We're just burning it off. But natural gas being at places where coal and oil are mined also makes mining those things dangerous. That's why there are or tend to be explosions at mines and things like that. Okay.